So we need to configure the Git username and mail ID. This is just to identify yourself with Git so that when you check who did the changes in the previous versions, Git can show you the name of the author. You can put in your own name here. We'll do the same for the email. Now to check if the fields are set correctly, you can also run this command. And yeah, the name is set to CodeWiki. Now let's have a look at how to initiate Git to control the version in a specific project directory. First, navigate to your project directory. I'll show you what I have here as well. Okay, so I have 3 files here. I'll remove this one for now. So I have 2 files here. So this is a basic project in HTML and CSS where I have designed a form. And now we'll initiate Git tracking in this project. So to do that, you have to use the command git init. What it does is create a folder .git in your project directory. This folder can be hidden, so you have to enable your hidden files to be able to see this. And in this, you see a lot of configuration files of Git. So this is where Git stores all your version history and all the previous versions, so that if you want to revert back to a previous version, you can do it easily, and the sources for that will be taken from here. Now we won't look at each and every file that is on this path, but it's just good for you to know that everything is here. Now if I just press enter in my terminal, you'll see that I keep getting the git prompt, which means git version control is enabled right now. But if you want to remove version control from your project, you just have to delete this folder, and all the tracking information of Git now disappears. So now if you press enter in this folder, you don't get the Git prompt anymore, which means that Git tracking is not enabled anymore. So let's enable tracking for now. Okay. You have that folder back here, and Git tracking is now enabled. Now we are going to have a look at the basic Git commands. Now the first command I like to start with while explaining Git to someone is git status. Now this is a very helpful command. It shows you exactly all the details on the tracking that you need to know. So the first thing that you see here is we are on the branch master, and you see master in the prompt as well. This basically means that you are working in the Git version or Git directory master. So the default directory you start in when you start Git version control is called master. Now this in Git terms is known as the branch. We will discuss in more details about branches later, but you need to know that by default you start in the branch master. You can also create new branches and work on those branches instead of making any changes to the master branch if you want. We'll check that later on. You also see that there are no commits yet, which means you have not committed any of the files that are in the folder yet to be added to the Git repository, you see that there are two untracked files, index.html and styles.css. Okay, if I want to add a file to be included in the Git repository, I have to use the git add command. Git also tells you the same thing here. So I can use git add index.html to add this to the staging area that we saw before. Now if I run git status again, I see that there is one change to be committed, which is index.html file. If I want to unstage this file, I can also use this command to move it back from the staging area, and it would end up here. Now styles.css is still untracked, and if I want to add this for tracking, I have to use again the git add command on this. Now let me show you another version of the git add command. Instead of specifying the file name, you can just type in dot to select all the files that you have here together and add them to the staging area. So if I did it before here, then I could have added both these files together to the staging area. But I just wanted to show you the version of the command where we use the file name. Anyway, if I do git add dot, then all the files that I have here are added to the staging area. And you see that the version number is updated as well. So the first version was version 1. Now we have version 2 that is created on master. Now if I run git status again, I see that there are two changes now to be committed to the repository. To commit my changes, I run the command git commit, and I can add in a message with this. Here, let's say my first version. And you can see that two files have been inserted. Now if I run git status, I see that I'm still on the branch master, but there is nothing to commit. The working tree is clean. Now let's do something interesting. Let's open VS Studio, which is the text editor that I use. You can use any text editor that you want, that you normally use. So I'm already in my project folder and I see I have these two files. Now let's create a new file, say modified.txt. Okay. You could have also created the file from here if you're not using a text editor. And either way, when you go back to the terminal and you run git status again, you see that Git is able to identify that there is a new file that we have added. Okay. Now if I want to add this file again to the staging area and commit it, I have to use the git add and the git status commands. Let's run git status. So I see there is one file that can be committed. Now let's run again git commit and say my second version. If I run git status again, we are on the branch master and there is nothing else to be committed. Now let's clear the screen before we look at the other commands. So I told you that Git is used to track the previous versions and go back to the previous versions if we need to. But how do we actually do that? Okay, let me show you something. First, note carefully that at the moment we have three different files in my project folder. We have index.html, modified.txt, and styles.css. And then we have the .git folder. Okay, I can see the same in VS Studio as well, which is my text editor. Okay, now let's try to have a look at what are the previous versions that I had in my project. This is the command that you use to see all the previous versions. So here I can see both my first version and my second version that I had created when I did a commit. Now if I want to go back to my first version, note here that I did not have modified.txt in my first version. I only added that into my second version. So if I want to check out my first version because I made a mistake, I do not need modified.txt, or I want to, go back to my previous version and check what I had there because I introduced a defect in my second version. To go back to my first version, I just have to use this command, git checkout, and I have to use this hash. Once I press enter, you can see what just happened. It says switching to this hash, you are in detached head state. Now note that in the prompt, after you typed in git log, it showed you that you have these two versions and your head was on the master version. Now your head is basically moved to the first version, which means you are now back in time on the first version. What does that mean? When I go back to this folder, you see magically the modified.txt file now disappears. Your project folder now has everything from the first version. How great is that? When I go to Visual Studio, I see the same thing. I don't have the modified.txt file anymore. Just imagine in the second version, if I had made lots of changes to index.html that resulted in some errors, some bugs that I was not able to fix, I could have just gone back to my previous version and I would have my original index.html from my first version restored as well. We'll see that shortly. For now, we know that we don't have modified.txt yet and we are back to our first version. Now we need to understand the concept of the head carefully. When I say that the head has been moved to my first version, that means Git knows that even though you are going back to the first version, you do not want to delete all the work that you did in the second version. So Git preserves your second version as well, but at the moment you are just looking at your first version. What does that mean? Let us again use the git log command to see our versions. And you see your head is on the first version, but your second version is still preserved. It's not deleted altogether. If you want, you can still go back to that. Okay. Now to go back to the most recent version on your master branch, all that you need to do is git checkout master. And you're back to my second version. And you see here that the prompt has changed as well.